Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over some of the encryption options that we have in Google Cloud. We're also going to talk about how we can use basically like user accounts and groups to also manage our security. I kind of alluded to that in the last video, but today we're actually going to take a little bit deeper of a look at it. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the encryption options that we have. And what we're going to see as we go through some of these services is that you will have the option for how encryption should be handled. And this will depend on if the service supports it. Um, Basically, you'll be asked, do you want Google to manage your encryption keys or do you want to provide them yourself? And you have the option to do so. Now, if you're letting Google manage it, you don't care about the encryption keys. Okay, you know the data is being encrypted here, and I'm kind of going at a high level where, let's say we create a service of some kind, and part of that service is that we are encrypting data. If we are letting Google manage it, then we just are aware that the data will be encrypted. We are happy with that, and we are fine to let it ride. Now, if we decide we want some more control over that, we can manage the encryption keys ourselves inside Google, or we can supply the encryption keys. So if basically you're going this route, you have a lot more control over it. There's a lot more customizability over it. You're probably going down the route of like generating local keys. You have some kind of a management system for when you want to roll keys out and roll them over and redistribute and all of that fun stuff. Going this route, Google manages everything for you. Just depends on how much control you want over your security. So from the server side of things here, now let's say that we are working with cloud storage, like we have in this visual. By default, everything is going to be encrypted with AES-256. So that's what we get for encryption. Um, Data in transit is being encrypted via TLS. So basically what's happening here is that our client is sending data up to our cloud network. However we are getting in, it's being encrypted by TLS when we create a session. Now, over in cloud storage here, we're encrypting with AES-256. This is all automatically and seamlessly happening if we let Google manage the keys for us. If you want to go customer managed, we would use something like Cloud KMS, which is the key management system key management service that we have here. You have API support, meaning that your encryption and your decryption needs are something that you would have to call, right? You are managing this, but we are still kind of letting the keys be hosted in the cloud. Right? So if we slip over here to Google Cloud, we have this key management service. Go ahead and enable it because this is a fresh project for this talk here. Effectively, this is kind of a nice middle point between managing everything yourself and letting Google manage everything. Your keys are going to be rotated automatically, and you can specify all of that fun stuff, but you can effectively create your own key rings. You can create and tweak that. So I to create a 680 key ring. I can specify where I want this to be stored. Let's go US East 1. And I'm not going to go through the rest of the steps because I don't want actually to create the keys. But I can import a key. I can say the key is externally managed. I can generate the key, and then I can set some more specific details. So what are we doing with this thing? Encrypting and decrypting symmetrically? Is it an asymmetric encryption? What type of protection level do we want? And we can dig into more details as well on some of these because maybe we want, a bit more stringent encryption happening. We can set the rotation period, meaning how often are these keys regenerated. And usually a good thing to have that so that keys don't get stale and become easily guessed at over time. And then we can label them if we need to work with them later on. But basically, it's a very nice and easy way to manage your keys. On the other side of things, keys are still managed in the cloud. So if you are exceedingly security conscious and you don't want anybody else to see your keys or deal with them, this might not be the solution for you. The other side means that you're going to create your own keys, your own encryption keys, sorry. They're going to be stored locally. So that means that you have to manage some sort of a key management system locally, whether It's very simplistic, whether it's a little bit more complicated, but it's local. What happens here and how this works with the cloud provider is that you will upload it as part of your API call, as part of your session, and then it goes away once your session is complete. So basically, we are only using these keys as needed, and then once the transactions are done, keys go away, Google doesn't get to keep it. Different ends of the spectrum here, right? So do you want simple, yet not really customizable, and other people have your keys? Do you want extremely customizable, much more control over your keys, but then you have to manage them? It's kind of a balancing act. It's a game of trade-offs. Which one do you want to pick? Right, so we have three options there. Now, with our encryption, we can have our various services make use of that. We can also basically encrypt our storage buckets with this as well. And this is kind of one of the nice features that we have in the cloud. We have the option to encrypt our disks. But what else do we have? Let's say that we are now, I guess, slightly changing topics here. Encryption, definitely worth dealing with. Are we encrypting disks? Are we encrypting transactions? Are we encrypting communications? Regardless of that, we're going to have a key management in some way. And that's really up to you how you're going to pick it. But one of the things that I mentioned before too is that we need to talk about Cloud IAM a bit. And what this is doing is it's saying who can access what on what resource. Sorry, just making sure that I didn't over talk myself from a prior video. I know I talked about this in one of our code labs, but we need to do a formal overview on this. So we have talked about encryption, we've talked about decryption in kind of a high level fashion. We'll get some experience of that in a lab. But we also need to figure out what IAM is, and this is the service that allows you to tie together people or groups or service accounts with resources. So who can do what with what resource? Now, in terms of the who, in the last video when we were talking about security models, I talked about service accounts, right? And I talked about Google Groups and Google accounts. Basically, we don't care what the who is. It can be a Gmail account, it can be a Google account, it can be a specific domain account as long as we have imported them into our cloud provider and basically into Google Cloud. We can set allowable domains. So this is one entity. We can also create service accounts, where this is what I showed you last time, where we can basically create machine level user accounts, which if you're in the Linux, or the Windows world, you would typically create an account to manage some service. Right? If you're in the Linux world, you probably have a MySQL user doing everything MySQL related. Same for Apache. Same for really any service that you have, they get their own account. That's what a service account does for us. We can put things into groups, so we can put entities into groups, give group level permissions, and then get a very similar idea, right? This group has access to BigQuery. Okay, well, who's in this group? Maybe it's all of you as students. You have access to a single BigQuery instance. And the permissions are then tied to the group, meaning I could add and subtract people as they add and drop the class without having to go in every single time and set permissions. It's just tied to the group in that instance. Another example would be if you have, say, human resources and an engineering and a business department or a marketing department. HR doesn't need the marketing roles, and vice versa. Marketing doesn't need the HR roles. We'll create groups for each of those, and then say HR gets access to the ERP database. Marketing gets access to our benchmarking database, and whatever we need to split them up as. So basically these kind of three different entities, and then we can also handle Google Workspace, which is essentially like bringing in a third-party domain into a LDAP or Active Directory type situation. Basically, you're something at yourcompany.com. Let's bring that domain into our Google Cloud provider. And there's similar practices in, say, Microsoft to bring accounts into Active Directory. All right, so these are the types of things that we can use to manage accounts, right? And let's say that we have a directory that already exists. That would be that at example.com scenario. Well, if we have, say, an Active Directory environment, meaning you're a Microsoft shop, or you're running an LDAP server, meaning you're not a Microsoft shop, effectively, if you don't know what any of these are, you're just managing your users, managing all of your entities. Entity could be a person, a server, an office, it could be a conference room, a printer. It's just something that we can put attributes onto. Those things can have access rights. Okay, so we have a directory service. We can pull them in to our Google Cloud scenario or our Google Cloud environment through Cloud Directory Sync. Now, this is a one-way sync. Like if I add somebody into my Google group, it's not going to go this way. You'd have to manually add them here and then pull them in that way. But this is how we bring in external parties into our environment. So what we can look at here then is how exactly we can use these roles and use these service level permissions. Again, we don't care, at least at this particular perspective, we don't care what the entity is. Again, service account, user, external domain. As long as we have them in the cloud system as a object, we can give them roles, we can give them permissions. So here we've got 3 different projects. This particular domain has access to all the projects. What does each project have access to? Well, this one has Compute Engine, App Engine, Cloud Storage. This one only has Cloud Storage. This one has PubSub and BigQuery. If you kind of notice every time you create a new project, all your APIs are disabled by default. This kind of leads in with that IAM policy strategy of only have the roles and permissions that you need. By starting with a clean slate, we can very easily assign new roles and permissions, right? So if I create a bookshelf project and I know that I need these 3 services, well, I could say give a service account access to this project, give that service account compute engine access, app engine access, cloud storage access, where maybe it's not the admin, but maybe it's a viewer or it's an editor or something of that nature. So we're basically very clearly specifying who has which access. And with this, honestly, we can go very, very detailed with roles, with permissions. You can get very, very fine-grained access if we want. So for instance here, if we give a Google group the instance admin role for Compute Engine, that means that whoever is in this group can delete compute instances. They can start it, they can stop it, they can set the machine type. Basically, they have full access. Whereas we might also give the instance viewer role, so this might be just a typical user. Maybe all they can do is instances.get, and then that's the only thing they have access to. Basically, the kind of key takeaway here is that if you are creating any type of service, any type of object in your particular environment, again, I know we're in the cloud applications view of this particular setup, but create a service account or create a group and give that entity the only permissions that it needs. And I will reiterate because I don't think I can say this enough. If I am dealing with the compute engine, there is no way that this group should have access to BigQuery. There is no reason for this group to have access to Cloud Functions, to storage, to anything that it doesn't need. Again, give it the least amount of privileges to work, and you will find yourself in a much better position security-wise. So to kind of recap here, pick your key management scheme. So do you want Google to manage it? Do you want to manage it yourself? Do you want something in between with Cloud KMS? Again, we have a demo on that. And then, after you figured out encryption, figure out your roles. Which entity has access to which service? So be very clear on who has access to what. Anyway, if I keep talking, I will just keep reiterating to keep your privileges very, very specific. So I will leave you with that. Anyway, hope this was helpful for you all. I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.